Okay, strap in. This is going to be a long video. Hopefully there's no fire alarms in this one. First thing I want you to do, go ahead and write your name on the top of the paper. And if we look at number 1, it says a school band's budget for the next year will be at least, it's going to come in handy later, $11,340 and at most $12,390. So if you remember at least and at most, if it's at minimum $11,340 and it's at most $12,390, it means that our budget's somewhere between there. So it can be written this way. We'd say X is bigger than $11,340 and smaller than $12,390. So it says they'll set aside $420 for new music stands and $8,400 for travel, which means they're already spending that much money. So if we add those together, we have 420 plus 8,400 means that what we're going to need to do is subtract $8,820 from both of these amounts, because what this problem is saying is that they've already spent that money on each of those things, on travel and music stands. And if you subtract those amounts, you end up with new totals. 11,340 minus 8,820 is going to make 2,520 less than X, which is less than 3,570, which means this is how much they can spend on uniforms. So what you're going to need to ask yourself is, if they're using the rest to buy 42 uniforms, how much are they spending on each uniform? So what we're going to have to do is look at your amounts here and divide them by 42 to see how much each uniform is going to cost. For number 2, Mr. Tenorio has a job that pays $45,500 a year. I'm guessing that's before taxes, because it'd be a lot less after that, with a guaranteed pay increase of $2,000 each year for 10 years. So if you think about y equals mx plus b, we know that m is like your slope, that's your rate. And we always look for words like per or each or every, and so it should jump out at you when it says $2,000 each year for 10 years. So we know our rate should be my $2,000 times your x. And it says he starts with $45,500. So if you remember, the b value is like where you start at, that's your initial. So we'd have 2,000x plus your 45,500, and then you'll be able to look at your answers to rearrange them. Question 3, there's a couple ways we can do this. The first one, if you have a calculator with you, what we can do is, if we're trying to find an equation for the table of values that we have x and we have y over here. So if you want to do a regression in your calculator, what we're going to have to do is open up a spreadsheet. And you always want to title column A is going to be your x, and ignore those numbers for a second. Column B is going to be your y. So what you're going to have to put in there is the numbers from your table. We have 3, negative 3 halves, 1, and negative 3. So in your table, notice we have 3, negative 3 halves, 1, and negative 3. And in your y column, we do the same thing. You have 0, 3, 1 and 1/3. If you don't know how to turn that into a mixed fraction, or take it from a mixed fraction, that's going to be 4/3, so that's why I put in 4/3 into my table, and 4. So after you get them all filled in there, you're going to go to your table, and what we're going to do is press menu, and we want to do statistics. We want to do a stat calculation, and we want to calculate the linear regression. We're finding the y equals mx plus b. And whenever you put that in, we're going to put column x for our x list, and we're going to put y for our y list, and then we're going to go press OK. Or you can press enter. But what you're going to find is it gives you y equals mx plus b. So on the right column there, your m value is negative 0.66 and your b value is 2. So looking at your equations, think about y equals mx plus b. You're going to have to turn the negative 0.66 into a fraction, but that will give you an answer. For number 4, there's, again, a couple ways we can do this. If you look at your graph, if you want to make an equation, think about y equals mx plus b again. If you look at your y-intercept, it hits it at negative 3, so we know my b value is going to be negative 3. And my slope for my graph, we need 2 points, so I'm going to pick these 2 points here. And I see that I'm rising up 3, and I'm running 4. So my slope is going to be 3 over 4. So my m value is 3 over 4x minus 3. So this is my equation. But if you look at your answer choices, the answer choices aren't written in y equals. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to solve each of these equations for y, or what you could also do is you could graph each one of these and see which one is going to match our graph on the right there. So there are two ways you could do this. For question 5, if you have y equals 6, let's think about our y-axis. We know our y-axis goes up and down on all these graphs. So if we think about y equals 6, if we look where we have 6 on your y-axis, on all these graphs here, if my equation says y is always going to equal 6, you need to think that on your graph, y equals 6 is always going to happen right here. So on every graph, y equals 6 goes across in a horizontal line. So if you remember the shortcut, that's why we use Hoy Vux. Because if you have a y equals, we're going to use Hoy because the slope is 0, 0 slope, and it's a horizontal line. And the only one that's a horizontal line with 0 slope would be answer C. Okay, for number 6, I'm not going to give you too many tips for this one because you should be able to do this one without too much help. But it says which line represents the graph of the equation y equals x plus 2. So if you look at your graph here, there's several lines. We have the line R, we have S, we've got U, then we've got T, and we've got X. So there's a lot of lines on this graph. So if you think about what you're given, y equals x plus 2, think about which one is your slope, which one's your y-intercept, and look at your lines given and see which one matches it. For number 7, look at your problem here and think about y equals mx plus b again. There's a lot of y equals mx plus b on this test. And instead of looking at all your answer choices, what you could do is try to make your own equation based on the graph. So if we look here, we can see that my y-intercept is right here at $3. So if you think y equals mx plus b, we know my b has to be $3, so it's going to have a plus 3 at the end. Then look at your slope. If we have our 2 points here, think about how much we're going up and how much we're going over. Now remember, your scale on the left, these aren't just jumping up by 1 each time. Look at how your scale is changing, and then think about your rise over run, and that will give you your slope that goes in front of your x. So think about going up and going over, and that's what's going to go in front of your x value. And then see which one of these questions, A, B, C, D, matches the equation that you made. For number 8, think about y equals mx plus b again. It says if the plus 4 is changed to minus 4, so it's asking us if we're changing this plus 4 to a minus 4, think about what the b value means in y equals mx plus b. So if your b value changes from plus 4 to minus 4, what's changing on your graph? And that will help you answer the question. Now 9 is very similar to 8. You're going to have to use y equals mx plus b, and it's asking you to compare these two graphs. And all the answer choices are talking about x-intercepts, y-intercepts, x-intercepts, slopes, y-intercepts. It's all things that relate to y equals mx plus b. So look at your two equations, f of x and g of x, and see what's the same between them. Look at your negative 3x plus 5 and 4x plus 5. Think about what's the same in those and what that relates to on your graph. Now for number 10, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. You can always plug each answer choice into, you could make an equation for each answer choice and you could see which one matches, or we could take the question given and make our own graph. So if you want to, think about what's given. You have 4x minus 3, so we know that our b value is going to be minus 3 because normally it's y equals mx plus b. So if I'm starting at negative 3 way down here, and my slope is 4, if you turned this 4 right here into a fraction, we know it would be 4 over 1. So we'd be going up 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. So my line's going to look something like this, but now we also have shading involved in it. So think about this greater than sign, and if that means we're going to shade above the line or below the line, and that should help you answer this question. We also need to know if it's a dotted line or a solid line, and this is all what this sign right here is going to tell you. So look in your notes to see if it's dotted, solid, and which side you would shade. Number 11. Michael's age is 3 more than twice Ashley's age. The sum of their ages is 18. What I want you to do is go ahead and underline the word sum. That's going to help us later. If M represents Michael's age, so I'm just going to write that again out to the side here, and A represents Ashley's age, which system represents the statements above? Well, we know that the sum of their ages is 18. So if you think of the word sum, we know that sum means you're adding things together. So if we add their ages together, we have Michael's age and we have Ashley's age. We know it needs to equal 18, and that came from our sentence about the sum. And it says Michael's age is 3 more than twice Ashley's age. So we know that Michael, whenever we compare him to Ashley's age, it's going to be 3 more. So think about if you have 3 more of something, what do you do with that 3? And if you're doing twice of something, what does that mean with the 2 there? And I'm not going to give you the answer here because it's going to give it away. But you should be able to set up an equation based on what they give you in that first sentence there. With number 12, we've been working on substitution a little bit here, but we haven't really seen any that look like this, because normally with substitution, we only do things that are substituted with y equals and x equals. But if you notice in both of these equations, we don't have an x or y by themselves. So what we need to do is pick one and get an x or y by itself. Well, I always ask myself, what would be easiest to get by itself? And I notice that I have an x that's alone right here. So if we want to get that x by itself, I'm going to write it out here. You have x plus 2y equals 7. If we want to get the x alone by itself, the first thing we need to move from this left side here would be your 2y. So if we want to take away 2y from both sides, we're going to have to subtract it. And since 7 doesn't have any y's, the 7 and the 2y don't combine. So it's just going to be x equals 7 minus 2y. So what I want you to do is cross off this first one, and we're going to replace it with what we just found. So we found that x equals 7 minus 2y. And so now we can solve it using substitution. So if we did solve it, we're going to take this 7 minus 2y, and that goes where my x is in the bottom equation. So look at your answer choices and think about what it would look like when we substitute that in there. Now for number 13, if you're ever asked to find solutions to a system, remember a system, just like we did with the ball where we threw it around the room and saw where the space shuttle landed on it, a system is where anything intersects. So if you have a solution to a system, remember it's where the lines intersect. And that's what a solution to a system means. So you can graph both of these equations on your calculator, and you can see where they intersect at, and it'll give you an ordered pair. For 14, it says Cindy has 500 feet of fencing around a rectangular pen that has a width of a feet and a length of b feet. This is represented by the equation 2 times a plus b equals 500. So all this is saying is that you have a rectangle, and you're multiplying the sides to get the total perimeter around it to make 500. So if it says she wants to solve it for b, it means we want to get this b by itself, but it's trapped inside there first. So we're going to have to get it untrapped. So if we want to solve for b, I'm going to rewrite it here. We have 2a plus b equals 500. And if we want to solve for that b, we got to kind of work from the outside in. So the first thing we're going to have to move is this 2. So think about how you would get that 2 away from that side. And so we know that 2 touching parentheses is going to mean multiply. So the first thing we're going to have to do is divide 2 on both sides. And then after you divide by 2, see what's left over and how you would get b by itself. Number 15, it says a math contest has 25 multiple choice questions where right answers, wrong answers, and omitted answers are worth 6, 0, and 2.5 points respectively. Therefore, a score is given by the formula below, where A represents the number of answered questions and W represents the number of incorrect questions. So if it says they answer 5 questions incorrectly, we know that that 5 is your W because it says W represents the number of incorrect questions. So if W is 5, we're going to replace this W with a 5 here. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my formula as such. And all I did is I replaced that W with the 5 in my new formula. So what you're going to have to do is think about how we can simplify this. So we're going to have to distribute the 6 with both of those and the 2.5 with both of those. And don't forget to combine terms that go together, and that will help you find an answer. For number 16, first thing that should jump out at you when you read it, it says if a line has a slope of 0. So if you remember what a slope of 0 looks like, if you think about what Slope Dude's Mountain, we go up, down, 0, undefined. So a slope of 0 is going to be that flat part right there. That has a slope of 0. And it goes through 2, 5. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little tiny grid here, and if I'm going through 2, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it means that my line has to pass through that dot there, and it has to have a slope of 0, and we said a slope of 0 is a flat horizontal line, so it means that my line needs to look like this. So you're going to have to look at your answer choices and think about which one's a horizontal line with a slope of 0 that goes through the point 2, 5. For 17, if we're talking about functions, remember to be able to be a function, it has to pass the vertical line test, or the VLT. So what you can do is you can graph each of these and see which one doesn't pass it and does pass it. Or if you remember on your VLT, we said that something can't repeat. So for example, if I had a graph that looked like this, we know that this fails my vertical line test because it passes, a vertical line passes through it twice. So this fails VLT. So since this fails your VLT, we need to think, what can't repeat? Is it your x's or y's? So think about these 2 points here. If you had both of those points as ordered pairs, what repeats there, your x's or y's? And then that will help you answer this question. Remember, when in doubt, you can always graph each of these, see which one doesn't pass your vertical line test, and that one's not a function. Or if you remember the shortcut, it's whether or not x or y can repeat. I'm not going to tell you which one. You're going to have to remember that or find it in your notes. Number 18. This one should be very easy. If you just take both of these equations and plug them into your calculator and see which graphs match, that's one way to answer it. Also, solution. If you look at all your solutions given, so -4, 0, 0, 4, 0, -4, and 4, 0, you can plug those points in to see which one answers your question. So you can also solve this by hand if you wanted to. Number 19, passes through the point 5, -1, and is perpendicular to 2x minus 3y equals 6. So if you remember perpendicular slopes, perpendicular lines mean they pass each other at right angles, and the slopes are opposite reciprocals of each other. So we need to know what my slope is. So if we look at the equation that's given here, if you want to find the slope, we're going to have to put this in terms of y. So we got to get y by itself. So think about what we need to move on this side to get y by itself, and then you're going to end up with a y equals problem. And we're going to need to look at the slope and see which one of these has perpendicular slopes. Actually, that was a really complicated way to explain that. All you need to do is graph this one and graph each of these and see which one hits it in a perpendicular way, and that'll be an easier way to get the answer. Number 20, which inequality is represented by the shading in the graph? So remember your shading and your signs. What I would go ahead and do is solve each of these problems for y. So for example, on number 1, if we want to get, if we want to get y by itself, we would add 4, so we'd get y less than or equal to 4, because we're adding 4 to both sides. With number 2, we're subtracting 4 from both sides, so we're going to get y is less than or equal to -4. For the next one, we'll get y is greater than or equal to, add 4 to both sides. So we get y greater than or equal to 4, and this one we get y less or greater than or equal to -4, because we have to subtract the 4's. So look at your 4 answer choices, look at your shading, and remember which one you're shading above the line. Is that going to be greater than, or is that going to be less than? And then you also need to look at to see if we're using +4 or -4. Don't let those 4's trip you up. For number 21, it says we have a straight line that passes through 2 points. We did a lot of practice with these. Remember how you find the slope of 2 points. We have x1, y1, x2, y2. And remember your equation for slope. What is the equation of a line? So what I would do is I would find your slope first and then look at the slopes of all these lines. You have 2, 3, -7, and -3. So as soon as you find your slope, that should help give you an answer. Number 22, it says, for 22, we can set this up as a proportion or using the direct variation equation. If you see the word varies directly with z, and we have w and z, there's a couple ways we can do this. So if it says if w is 15 when z is 9, think about w over z. So if w is 15 when z is 9, it varies directly with z. It says what is the value of z when w is 5? So if we set this up as a proportion, we have 15 over 9 equals 5 over something. So one thing we have to make sure of is I have my w's on top. I have w of 15 and w of 5, and I have my z's on bottom. I have 9 and I have x, or z. Sorry, that's what we're looking for, z. So you can do butterfly math to solve this. You can do 15 times z equals 9 times 5. So we'd have 15z equals 9 times 5, and you can solve it for z from there. The other way you can solve this problem, I'm going to go ahead and erase this, is using a direct variation equation. So we know direct variation is y equals k times x. And if it says w varies directly with z, your equation is going to be w equals k times z. So we can plug in our 15 and our 9 here. It says w is 15 when z is 9. And we'll end up getting k equals 15 divided by 9. And it says, what is the value for z when w is 5? And we look at our equation. It says if w is 5, we know my k value is 15 over 9. And we're looking for z. So you can also solve it this way. The proportion might be a little bit easier, so I would probably solve it that first way instead of the second way. Set up as a proportion will be a little bit easier than taking a couple steps. Number 23, it says, which of the following functions is represented by the statement, a number is 5 more than 3 times another number? So what I want you to think about is, if it says a number, we'll just go ahead and call that y. If it says a number is 5 more, so think about if you had 5 more of something, what would you be doing? If you had 5 more than 1, it would be 1 plus 5. And so if you have 5 more, we know we're just going to be adding 5 to something. So it says a number, we said that's y, is 5 more than 3 times another number. So it says another number, we're going to go ahead and call that x. And if we do 3 times another number, we'll call that 3x. And so if we have our equation now and we just read it back, we said a number, y, is, and the word is a good way to mean equal sign. So a number is 5 more, which is the plus 5, than 3 times another number, which is where my 3x came from. And there's a free answer for you. So 3x plus 5. Number 24. This one you can do a couple ways. We could plug this into my calculator and just see which one of the graphs match it. You could also solve it for y and use y equals mx plus b to solve. 25, it says, what is the range? If you forget range, remember range is your y. Range of the function y equals 4x minus 1 for the domain is your x values, where x has to be between 4 and 8. So if you know your domain is your x values and it goes from 4 to 8, look in your equation here, and we know that we're going to be plugging in our x values where the x goes. So what I would do is I would plug in your 4 in here first, and you get 4 times 4 minus 1, and that gives you your first value. And then after that, go ahead and plug in your 8, and do 4 times 8 minus 1, and that will give you your y value, and those are your range values there. For 26, it says a pail of water containing 150 ounces has a slow leak. Well, if you have a leak in something, it should be getting less because things are things are going down whenever it's leaking. So if we look at our graph, we start at 150 here, and we're leaking water. So the water level is going down, so that's why this graph is going down over a period of time. And it says which option correctly describes both the domain and range. Well, remember, domain is your x values and range is your y values. So I want you to look at this graph and look at your x values and see how your x is changing over time. So where do we start at and where do we finish at for your x values? Same thing for y, but with y it's tricky. The reason that it's tricky is because y always goes from bottom to top. We always measure y from very, very bottom to the top. So look at where your x starts and it goes from left to right, and look at where your range starts but from bottom to top. And that should help you solve your domain and range problem here. With 27, there's a few ways you can do this. Like we did earlier where we plugged it into our calculator, you can make a list. And so I can go into spreadsheets, similar to how we did the one before this where we plugged in our x and y and found a regression. You can solve this one that way, but what you can also do is look at your question, and we know that cars are C and dog barks are going to be B. What I would do is I would pick a couple of these points, so maybe start with something like 10 and 25, and then go into your equations, plug in 10 and 25 and see if they work. So for example, if the number of cars C is 10 and we plug in 10 here, we get 2 times 10 plus 2, and my dog barks is 25. 2 times 10 is 20, plus 2 is 22, and we end up with 25 equals 22. So whenever we plug those in, we can see that A does not work for it. So what you need to do is you can plug these into each function and see which one will solve your question. For number 28, if it says the slope of the graph x equals 3, well, if we think about where your x-axis is, we know we have y up here and we have x. So if it says x equals 3, we have 1, 2, 3. So if x is 3, we know we have a point right here, but x is also 3 right here. It's also 3 right here. X is 3 on all these points. So if you think about what kind of line that makes, it makes a vertical line, because if x equals 3, it's always going to be on a vertical line there. And that's the same thing whenever we use Hoy Vux. We know that if we have an x equation, we're going to use Vux, because we have a vertical line. It's an x equals. And think about what the U stands for. I'm not going to give it away because you should be able to look at it, and that's going to give you the answer there. For number 101, what's the value of x? You can solve it with your calculator doing number solve if you wanted to, but I'd recommend solving it by hand just because it's good practice here. So if you want to solve for x, we're going to have to multiply first, so make sure you distribute your -2, and then we're going to get a little bit longer of an equation, but you can solve it and simplify it for x. Number 102, the distance varies directly to the amount of fuel it consumes. 102 is very similar to the way in which we solved number 22. So if you go back and look at 22, 22 is very similar because it's dealing with direct variation. So you should be able to solve 102 using the same formulas. And that's the end of your review. If you have any questions, please make sure to ask one of the Algebra 1 teachers. Otherwise, make sure you study this and be ready for your final. If you need to know the final exam schedule, make sure you ask one of your teachers beforehand so you can be ready for your test. Good luck on it. Do your best.